The man in the faded shirt city was loud that evening, filled with the honking of cars and the chatter of people rushing home. It was one of those days when the sun had already set, but the air still carried the heat of the day. In the corner of a small, dimly lit street, a man in a faded shirt and worn-out shoes walked slowly, his hands in his pockets. Nobody paid much attention to him. He looked like any other tired worker returning from a long shift. But this man was not ordinary. Hidden behind the dusty glasses and the quiet, humble walk was Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, pretending to be poor for a reason only he knew. He had chosen this evening carefully. He didn't want bodyguards, cameras, or assistants. Today, he wanted to be invisible. He wanted to blend in with the people who were often overlooked. He had heard stories of kindness, but he also knew how easy it was for people to judge based on appearance. And tonight he was here to test something, the kindness of strangers. More specifically, one stranger, a waitress who worked in a small old café he had passed by many times, but never entered. Her name was Mia. Sundar had done his research quietly. Mia was known to the locals as someone who always smiled, who never turned away a hungry person, and who often paid for meals out of her own pocket. But Sundar had also heard whispers. The cafe was struggling. The owner was thinking of letting her go because she spent too much time on kindness and not enough on profit. Sundar wanted to see for himself what kind of heart she had. When she thought no one important was watching, the cafe door creaked as he pushed it open. A small bell above the door jingled. The smell of fresh coffee and warm bread filled the air, and the soft hum of an old radio played in the background. There were only 3 tables occupied. An elderly couple sharing soup, a student with a laptop, and a man in a business suit on the phone. Sundar walked in slowly, his head slightly lowered, as if carrying the weight of 100 worries. His clothes were plain, and his shoes had small cracks near the soles. He looked like someone counting every coin before buying a meal. Mia noticed him immediately. She had a way of spotting the quiet ones. Her hair was tied back in a messy bun, and her apron had small coffee stains, but her smile was warm and welcoming. "Good evening," she said gently, handing him a menu. "You can sit wherever you like." Sundar took a seat near the window, where the dim streetlight cast a soft glow on his face. He glanced at the menu and frowned slightly, as though even the cheapest item might be too much for him. Mia returned after a moment, holding a small notepad. "What can I get for you?" she asked kindly. He hesitated, then said in a quiet voice, "Just a cup of water." "If that's okay." Her eyebrows lifted for a split second, but she didn't question him. "Of course," she said with a smile. "But are you sure that's all?" "Yes," Sundar replied softly. "I'm not really hungry." But his eyes, tired and sunken, told a different story. Mia walked to the counter. But instead of pouring just water, she picked up a bowl from the kitchen. Minutes later, she returned with a steaming bowl of soup and placed it in front of him. "This one's on the house," she said, almost in a whisper, as if she didn't want the owner to hear. Sundar looked at the soup, then at her. "But I didn't order this." "You looked like you needed it," she said simply. Turning to walk away, he took a spoonful, and for a brief moment, he forgot about the experiment, the disguise, the test. He felt something warm, not just from the soup, but from the gesture. Around him, life in the cafe went on, cups clinking, soft chatter, the low hum of the radio. But in that moment, all he could think about was how rare it was to find someone who gave without expecting anything in return. After a while, Mia returned to refill his water. "You're not from around here, are you?" she asked casually. He shook his head, "Just passing through." She smiled again, but there was a trace of sadness in her eyes. "Well, I hope the road ahead is kinder to you than it's been today." Her words stayed with him. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know that this simple act of kindness was being watched and remembered. Sundar wanted to ask her about her life, about why she worked here, but before he could, the cafe door burst open. A man in a sharp suit stormed in, the owner. His eyes scanned the room and stopped at Sundar's table. "Mia," he barked. Did you give him food without paying again? Mia froze. Sundar could feel the tension. The other customers turned their heads slightly, pretending not to watch. He looked hungry, Mia said softly. We're running a business, not a charity. The owner's voice was sharp and cold. Before Sundar could speak, the owner stepped closer. Sir, if you can't pay, I'll have to ask you to leave. Sundar's fingers tightened around the spoon. He was about to stand up when Nia stepped between them. He's my guest, she said firmly, her voice trembling but strong. And if it's a problem, take it out of my paycheck. The owner's face hardened. You're on thin ice, Mia. One more stunt like this and you're out. He turned and walked back to the counter, muttering under his breath. Sundar sat there, watching her. She had no idea that the man she had just defended could change her life in an instant. But he wasn't ready to reveal anything yet. This was just the beginning. He needed to know if her kindness was real when things got harder as he took another spoonful of soup. He made up his mind. Tomorrow he would come back. But next time, he would test her in a way that would push her kindness to its limits. Asterisk the return to the café the night after he first met Mia. Sundar sat in the quiet of his modest hotel room, staring at the untouched cup of tea in front of him. Outside, the city lights blinked against the darkness, but his mind was fixed on the café, on the look in Mia's eyes when she stood up for him. It wasn't just what she did, it was how she did it. There was no hesitation, no calculation, no pause to wonder if it was worth the trouble. She simply saw someone in need and acted. In his life, he had met countless people with wealth, education, and influence. But moments of such pure kindness were rare, almost fragile, like a candle flame in a storm. He thought about how easy it would have been for her to ignore him that night, to walk away, to pretend she hadn't noticed. Most people in her position probably would have. She had her own struggles, her own bills, and a boss who clearly valued profit over compassion. Yet she chose to take the risk. Sundar wondered why. Was it because she'd known hardship herself? Or was it just who she was, someone who would help, even if it cost her? He decided he needed to know more. The next day. He woke early, dressed again in his plain clothes, and left his hotel without breakfast. This time, he walked slower to the cafe, blending into the crowd of workers and street vendors. The morning air was cool, carrying the smell of fresh bread from nearby bakeries. But Sundar's mind was already rehearsing the second part of his plan. Yesterday, he had tested her kindness with hunger. Today, he would test it with something heavier, the kind of problem that required more than just a warm meal. When he reached the cafe, it was less busy than the night before. Sunlight streamed through the dusty windows, catching motes of flour in the air. Mia was behind the counter, wiping down mugs, her hair still in the same messy bun. She looked up when she saw him and smiled, not the polite, distant smile most servers give to strangers, but the genuine kind, as if she were truly glad to see him again. You're back, she said warmly, walking over with a menu. I was hoping you might stop by. Sundar hesitated before sitting down, as if unsure if he should be there. I didn't get to thank you properly for yesterday, he said, his voice low. You didn't have to do that. Maybe I didn't, she replied, but I want to. Then she leaned in slightly and lowered her voice. Don't worry, the boss isn't here yet. He chuckled softly, though inside he felt something tighten. She was still thinking about the risk she took. I'm not sure I can order much, he said, opening the menu but pretending to study the prices. Money's a bit tight, right? Now, how about some toast and coffee, she offered. My treat again. He paused, then shook his head. Actually, there's something I need to ask you. I might need a job. Anything at all. Washing dishes? Cleaning tables? I can work hard. Her eyes softened, and for a moment, she didn't speak. She studied him like she was trying to read the truth between his words. You're looking for work? She asked finally. Yes, but I don't have much experience, and I don't have any papers on me right now. He let his voice drop, making it sound like the kind of answer that often makes people step back. Instead of stepping back, Mia tilted her head thoughtfully. I wish I could say we're hiring, but we're not, she admitted. And even if we were, the owner would never agree without proper documents. She frowned, clearly frustrated by her own words. But let me think. Maybe I can ask around. I know someone who runs a small grocery store nearby. Sundar could see that she was serious, that she was already considering how to help him. He had expected her to be kind again, but not to offer to vouch for a stranger she barely knew. He decided to push further. I'd be grateful, he said slowly. But would you really recommend me? You don't know me. Sometimes you just know, she said simply, as if that explained everything. Before he could reply, the cafe door opened and the owner walked in. His sharp eyes swept across the room, and when he saw Sundar, his jaw tightened. You again, he said flatly, walking over. Are you here to eat for free? Mia straightened immediately. He's my friend, she said firmly. And he's not eating for free. I'm paying for it. The owner crossed his arms. And I suppose you're also going to cover the bills when the cafe closes because of people like him? Mia's face flushed, but she didn't back down. Maybe if we treated people better, we'd have more customers. The owner's eyes narrowed. Careful, Mia. You're one word away from not having a job. He turned to Sundar. Finish your coffee and go. I don't want to see you here again. The room fell silent. The other customers looked away, pretending not to hear, but Sundar could feel the tension pressing down on him. Mia's hands clenched at her sides, her breath quickening, and then she did something that made Sundar's chest tighten. She reached into her apron pocket, pulled out a folded bill, and set it on the table in front of him. Take this, she said quietly, just in case you don't get work today. You can pay me back someday if you want, but you don't have to. Sundar stared at the money, then at her. He didn't move. She had no idea who he was, no idea that he could buy the cafe 10 times over. To her, he was just a struggling stranger, and she was still willing to help. The owner scoffed, muttered something under his breath, and walked to the back. Mia gave Sundar a small, reassuring smile, but before he could thank her, his phone, the one he had kept hidden in his pocket, began to vibrate. The name flashing on the screen was one that could shatter his cover instantly. He quickly silenced it, but not before Mia noticed the flash of the name and the look that crossed his face. She didn't ask, but Sundar could tell she had questions. And he knew tomorrow the test would become even harder. Asterisk the bigger testy. Night after the second visit, Sundar lay awake in his hotel bed, staring at the ceiling. The hum of the air conditioner was the only sound in the room, but his mind was loud with thoughts. He kept replaying the moment when Mia slipped the folded bill onto the table. It was such a small gesture in money, but massive in meaning. She didn't just feed him. She gave from what little she had, knowing there was no guarantee she'd ever get it back. People didn't usually do that for strangers anymore. Still, part of him wondered, was this just sympathy for a man who looked down on his luck? Or was it a deeper kind of kindness, the kind that stayed even when helping became inconvenient, risky, or costly? Sundar had learned over the years that true character often showed when things got uncomfortable. He wanted to see what Mia would do if his presence brought her real trouble, not just a scolding from her boss, but something that might make her choose between her own security and someone else's need. He had already decided what he would do. It would mean pushing her into a difficult position, one where most people would step back. It wasn't something he enjoyed doing. In fact, the thought of it made him feel slightly guilty. But he knew that without a real challenge, he wouldn't see her truest self. The next morning, the cafe was already half full when he arrived. The aroma of fresh coffee filled the air, mixed with the faint smell of butter melting on toast. The radio played an old love song in the background, and sunlight spilled across the wooden floor. Mia was behind the counter, her hands moving quickly, as she balanced plates and mugs, but her face lit up when she saw him at the door. You came back again, she said, as she approached, wiping her hands on her apron. I was starting to think I scared you off with all the drama yesterday. Takes more than that to scare me, he replied with a faint smile, lowering himself into the same corner seat as before Dot, but this time, instead of just ordering water or coffee, he leaned forward and spoke in a hushed tone. Mia, I have a problem. A big one. Her smile faded into concern. What's wrong? He let out a slow breath as if weighing whether to share it. I need somewhere to leave my bag for a few days. It's all I have left. I can't carry it with me everywhere, and I'm worried it'll be stolen if I leave it somewhere outside. Mia tilted her head, frowning slightly. What's in it? Just clothes. A few personal things. Nothing valuable to anyone else, but important to me. He hesitated, then added, I don't know any here. I thought, maybe you could keep it for me, just until I figure things out. It was an innocent request on the surface, but Sundar knew it was loaded. For someone in Mia's position, agreeing to hold a stranger's belongings could easily bring suspicion from her boss. It could even be dangerous if the boss thought she was hiding something. Mia didn't answer right away. She glanced toward the counter where the owner stood, busy counting the till. She bit her lip, thinking. Then she said quietly, Bring it here tonight, after closing. I'll keep it safe in the back room. Sundar looked at her for a long moment. Are you sure? If it matters to you, it matters to me, she said firmly. Her answer caught him off guard. He had expected her to hesitate longer, to weigh her own risks more heavily. But she had agreed in less than a minute. For the rest of that morning, Sundar sat in a corner, sipping coffee and watching her move between tables. She laughed with customers, refilled cups without being asked, and slipped an extra cookie, too. A boy sitting with his mother. The owner didn't notice, but Sundar did. Every small kindness seemed to be part of her nature, woven into everything she did. And then, around midday, the first part of his plan began. A man in dark clothes walked into the café. He wasn't part of the normal crowd. Sundar had arranged for him, an acquaintance from a local outreach program, to come in and pretend to know Sundar from the street. The man approached his table, speaking just loud enough for Mia too. Here. So, you're still hanging around here? Haven't found a place to crash yet? Not yet, Sundar replied quietly, playing his part. The man shook his head. Be careful. Some people don't like folks like us hanging around. From the corner of his eye, Sundar saw Mia pause mid-step, glancing toward them. Her face had a flicker of worry. A few minutes later, the owner came over, his expression dark. You're attracting trouble, he said to Sundar. I told you yesterday not to come back. Mia stepped forward immediately. He's not causing trouble, she said firmly. He's just having coffee. Coffee that you probably paid for again, the owner snapped, and now his friends are coming in. This isn't a shelter, Mia. So what if it was, she said, her voice low but steady. At least it would be worth something. Sundar could see the owner's patience thinning. His jaw tightened, his voice sharp. Enough? Mia, if I see him here again after today, you're done. No warning, no second chances. The words hung in the air. Mia's eyes shifted between Sundar and her boss. This was the moment Sundar had been waiting for. The choice between keeping her job or standing by someone who, for all she knew, had nothing to offer in return. She looked back at Sundar, and for a brief second, her expression softened. Then she turned to the owner. I guess you'll have to find someone else to serve your coffee, she said quietly, untying her apron and placing it on the counter. The cafe went silent. Sundar felt a strange mix of pride and guilt swell in his chest. She walked over to his table, picked up his empty cup, and gave him a faint smile. Let's go, she said. And just like that, she walked out of the cafe, leaving her job behind, all for a stranger in a faded shirt. But what she didn't know yet was that her life was about to change forever. Asterisk the walk into the unknown. Cafe door closed behind them with a soft thud, but to Mia, it felt heavier, as if she had shut the door on a part of her life she had depended on for years. The air outside was cool and sharp, carrying the faint scent of roasted peanuts from a street vendor down the block. She pulled her thin cardigan tighter around her shoulders, but her steps were steady. Sundar walked beside her, his eyes scanning. her face, trying to read what she might be thinking. She didn't speak at first, and he didn't push her. The street around them buzzed with the rhythm of the city, the honking of impatient drivers, the murmur of conversations drifting from shopfronts, the occasional bark of a stray dog. Yet in that moment, it felt like the two of them were walking in a bubble of silence that after a while, he broke it. "You didn't have to do that," he said softly. She glanced at him, her eyes calm but firm. "Yes, I did. You gave up your job. That's not a small thing." "Neither is dignity," she replied without hesitation. "If helping someone means I get punished, then maybe I shouldn't be working there in the first place." She paused, then added with a faint smile, "Besides, I've been through worse. I'll figure something out." Her words hit him harder than he expected. There was no bitterness in her voice, no trace of regret, just a quiet certainty. Sundar thought about how many people in her position would have chosen security over compassion, and how rare it was to find someone who didn't weigh kindness on a scale of personal cost. They reached a small park and sat on a bench under a tree whose branches swayed gently in the breeze. Mia set her apron, now folded, beside her and let out a long sigh. "So," she said, "what now? Where are you headed?" Sundar looked down at his worn shoes, playing his part. "I was going to ask if you knew anywhere cheap to stay. Somewhere safe. I've been sleeping in bus stations the last few nights." She frowned. "Bus stations aren't safe." "Not here. You'll lose more than sleep if you stay there." She thought for a moment, then said, "There's a small hostel a few streets from here. It's nothing fancy, but it's clean. I can take you there." He nodded, "Thank you, but I can't pay for more than one night." Mia's expression softened, and she reached for her bag. "How much do you have?" "Not much," he murmured, naming an amount that would barely cover a meal. She counted the money in her wallet, then handed him a folded note. "Take this. It should cover a week. By then, we'll figure something else out." Sundar stared at her hand, holding the money. This was the second time she had given him something tangible, something she worked for, without asking for anything back. He felt a pang of guilt for letting her believe he needed it. But he reminded himself that this was part of a test, part of seeing how far her kindness went. As they walked toward the hostel, the streets grew narrower, lined with laundry, hanging from balconies, and the chatter of families cooking dinner. Children played barefoot in the alleys, chasing a deflated soccer ball, their laughter echoing against the buildings. Sundar noticed how Mia smiled at them as they passed, even waving to a little girl who shyly hid behind a doorway. When they reached the hostel, it was a small, aging building with peeling paint and a creaky sign swinging above the door. Inside, the air smelled faintly of detergent and incense. The woman at the front desk looked up, her eyes quickly scanning Sundar from head to toe before landing on Mia. "Room for one?" she asked. "Yes," Mia said, placing the money on the counter. "For a week, please." As the woman handed over the key, Sundar could see Mia was already thinking ahead. "I'll check on you in the mornings," she said. "And if you need food, I'll bring some." He felt the weight of her words. She had just lost her income, yet her first thought was how to take care of him. As they left the reception area and walked toward the narrow hallway, Sundar's phone vibrated again in his pocket. He ignored it, but the light from the screen briefly lit his face. Mia caught the reflection and frowned slightly. "You have a phone?" she said softly. Almost like a question, he hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, but it's complicated." She didn't press further, but he could tell she was curious. Instead, she smiled faintly and handed him the key. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll see what we can do about finding you work." As she turned to leave, Sundar stood in the dim hallway, watching her walk away. He could feel the moment approaching when his disguise would no longer hold. But he wasn't ready yet. There was still one more thing he needed to know about her. One more push that would reveal just how deep her kindness ran. And that push would come sooner than she expected. Asterisk, the final push following morning. The sun was barely peeking over the rooftops when Sundar stepped out of the hostel. The air was cool and damp, and the streets were still waking up. Shopkeepers were rolling up shutters. The smell of fresh bread drifted from a corner bakery, and the distant rumble of buses carried through the narrow lanes. He stood there for a moment, hands in his pockets, his mind fixed on what he needed to do next. Today would be the hardest part of the test. It wasn't enough to see Mia offer kindness when it was safe, or even when it cost her a little money. He needed to see if she would stand by someone when there was nothing in it for her at all. When helping could bring her real trouble, perhaps even danger. He walked slowly toward the cafe's neighborhood, even though Mia no longer worked there. He knew she'd likely be in the area, either looking for work or helping somewhere else. And sure enough, he spotted her near the market, speaking to an older woman at a vegetable stall. She had a paper in one hand, probably a list of places, hiring, and her hair was pulled back loosely, strands falling across her face in the breeze. When she saw him, her eyes lit up in that same way they had before, warm and genuine. "Morning," she said. "How's the room?" "Decent enough." "Better than the bus station," he replied with a faint smile. Then his tone shifted, softer, almost hesitant. "Mia, something happened last night." Her smile faded instantly. "What is it?" He looked down at the ground, laying his part carefully. "Someone from the street, a man I used to talk to, he was picked up by the police. They're saying he stole something from a store, but he didn't. I was with him earlier in the day. I know he couldn't have done it, but they think I might know more." Her brow furrowed. "What are they going to do?" "They want to question me," he said, his voice low, almost shaky. "But I don't trust going alone. You're the only person I know here. Would you come with me? Just to the station? I know it's asking a lot." He saw the flicker in her eyes, not reluctance, but awareness of the risk. She'd be walking into a police station with a man she'd known for less than a week, a man who appeared to have no home, no job, and now, a possible connection to trouble. She took a deep breath, then nodded. "Okay, let's go." As they made their way to the station, the streets seemed to narrow around them. The usual chatter of shop fronts felt quieter, as if even the city sensed the weight of the day. Sundar noticed the way Mia kept glancing at him, not with suspicion, but with a kind of quiet reassurance, as though she wanted him to know he wasn't alone. When they arrived, the building loomed ahead, its faded walls and barred windows giving off a cold, heavy presence. An officer at the desk looked them over as they entered, his eyes lingering on Sundar's clothes. "You here for questioning?" he asked in a flat voice. "Yes," Sundar replied. "She's with me." The officer's gaze shifted to Mia. "And you are?" "A friend," she said firmly. "He asked me to be here." They were led to a small, dimly lit room with a table and 2 chairs. Sundar sat down, Mia beside him, and the questioning began. The officer's tone was sharp, almost dismissive, as he asked about where Sundar had been, who he'd spoken to, and whether he had any connection to the theft. Mia stayed quiet for most of it. But when the officer's questions grew more pointed, she spoke up. "He didn't do anything wrong. I was with him for part of the day. You're wasting time keeping him here when you should be looking for the real person." The officer gave her a cold look. "You vouching for him?" Without hesitation, she said, "Yes." That was the moment Sundar knew. It wasn't about food or money anymore. She was risking her own name now, standing in a room where a single, wrong word could turn suspicion toward her. And still, she didn't waver. After what felt like hours, the officer finally sighed and stood. "You can go, but don't leave town for a few days." Outside, the sunlight felt warmer, almost blinding after the dim light of the station. Mia looked at him and smiled faintly. "See? Told you we'd be fine." Sundar felt a strange mix of relief and guilt. He had pushed her to the edge, watched her defend him without knowing who he really was. And she had passed every test without a cracked dot as they walked down the street. He knew he couldn't keep the truth from her much longer. But he also knew the reveal had to be perfect. A moment that would not only surprise her, but also make her understand why he had done all this. Tomorrow, he decided, would be that day. And when it came, everything would change. Asterisk the truth in. Plain sight, the morning of the reveal arrived with a quiet stillness, the kind that makes every sound sharper. The streets were just beginning to stir, the shop shutters rattling open, the first scent of brewing chai wafting through the air. Sundar woke early, sat on the edge of his hostel bed, and stared at the folded clothes on the chair. His disguise, the faded shirt, worn-out shoes, and dust-smudged glasses, lay there, the tools of the week's deception for days. He had played the role of a man with nothing, testing the patience and generosity of someone who had even less than she deserved. And she had passed every test without faltering, giving food when it could cost her wages, offering money she couldn't spare, vouching for him in front of authority, and walking away from her only job just to stand by his side. It was time to give back more than she could ever imagine. He dressed differently that day. The plain shirt was replaced with a crisp, light blue button-down. His shoes were polished, his hair neatly combed. When he looked in the mirror, the reflection staring back wasn't the man Mia had met. It was the man the world knew, Sundar Pichai, CEO of Google. But the most important part wasn't the clothes. It was the plan. He wanted her to see the truth not in a dramatic, public spectacle, but in a way that would show her how much her choices mattered. So he made a call, quiet and brief, to someone who could arrange exactly what he needed in just a few hours. By late morning, he was waiting at the park bench where they had sat after leaving the cafe days ago. He watched the street until he saw her walking toward him, her hair pulled back, a tired smile on her face. "You clean up well," she said, half teasing. "Job interview?" He smiled faintly. "Something like that. Actually, I was hoping you come with me somewhere today. Or just trust me," he said. "Like you have all week." They walked through winding streets until they reached a sleek glass building that looked wildly out of place among the older brick shops surrounding it. Security guards stood at the entrance, their uniforms sharp, their eyes scanning every person who approached. Mia slowed, frowning. "This doesn't look like somewhere I belong." Asterisk, "It's exactly where you belong," Sundar said, his voice calm but certain. Before she could ask, one of the guards stepped forward, greeting Sundar. With a respectful nod, "Good morning, sir. Everything is ready upstairs." Mia looked between the guard and Sundar, confusion spreading across her face. "Sir," she repeated quietly. Inside, the lobby gleamed with polished marble floors, tall plants in silver pots, and the soft hum of conversation. A receptionist stood as they approached, her smile practiced but genuine. "Mr. Pichai, the conference room is prepared." Mia froze, mid-step. "Pichai," she whispered. He stopped, turned to face her fully. And for the first time since they met, he let the disguise fall completely. "Mia, my name is Sundar Pichai. I'm the CEO of Google." Her eyes widened, disbelief flashing across her face. "You what? But why?" "Because I needed to see something for myself," he said softly. "I've spent years building things, leading teams, making decisions that affect millions. But sometimes you can forget what real kindness looks like when you're surrounded by power and comfort. I wanted to see if there were still people in this world who give without expecting anything back." She shook her head slowly, as if trying to reconcile the man she had fed soup to with the man standing in front of her now. "And you chose me?" "I didn't just choose you," he said. "You proved yourself every single day. You gave food when it meant getting scolded. You gave money when you didn't have enough for yourself. You defended me to your boss, to strangers, to the police. You walked away from your job for someone you thought had nothing to offer you." He reached into his bag and slid an envelope toward her. Inside is an offer. "I want you to manage a new community cafe we're opening, a place where no one is turned away no matter what they can pay. Full salary, benefits, and the freedom to run it with the kindness you've shown me." Mia opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a formal letter, the logo crisp at the top, her name printed clearly. But beneath it was also a cashier's check, the amount large enough to erase any worry she might have carried for. Ears. Her hand flew to her mouth. This I can't. It's too much. It's exactly right, Sundar said. Because what you gave me this week is worth more than this could ever repay. You reminded me what matters? Her eyes shimmered, and for a moment she couldn't speak. Then, with a shaky laugh, she said, I thought you just liked free soup. He laughed softly too, and in that moment the tension of the week melted away. Outside, the city carried on. Buses roared past. People hurried to their destinations. But at that glass table in the corner of the building, one life had just changed forever. As they walked out together, Mia glanced at him. You know, she said with a small smile, next time you want to test someone's kindness, maybe just ask them to help carry groceries. And miss all this? Sundar replied, not a chance. And with that, they stepped into the sunlight, not as a CEO and a waitress, but as two people bound by a week of honesty, sacrifice, and a reminder that kindness, even when it costs something, can change everything.